He walked into his home after a long week, expecting nothing more dramatic than the smell of dinner and the sound of his children arguing about chores. Instead, one text and one photograph revealed the unthinkable. His wife was in the arms of his best friend. Within 24 hours, she would lose everything. For 12 years, Ethan Hale had carried himself with quiet consistency. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room. But if you asked his neighbors who shoveled their driveway during last winter's storm, or if you asked his coworkers who stayed late to help close the books at the end of every quarter, they would all give the same answer. Ethan. Dependable, loyal, steady. At 39, he wore that loyalty like a second skin. He had married young, fallen for Claire in their early 20s, and had never once strayed from the vows he made before God, family, and friends. In fact, he often told people that his greatest achievement wasn't his career in logistics or the modest two-story home he paid off faster than anyone expected. It was the family he built with her. 2 children, laughter around the dinner table, and the promise that no matter what storms life brought, they would face them together. That loyalty didn't end with his wife. Ethan had also extended it to his best friend, Daniel Brooks, a man he had known since high school. Together they had survived bad haircuts, football injuries, failed college romances, and their first terrifying years in the working world. If Ethan trusted Claire with his heart, he trusted Daniel with his life. The man was his brother in every way but blood. So when Daniel needed help moving into a new apartment across town, Ethan didn't hesitate, even though it meant missing his daughter Emily's piano recital. He told himself he'd make it up to her with ice cream afterward. He even convinced himself that missing one event wasn't the end of the world. After all, wasn't this what family did? Showed up for each other? That was Ethan's weakness. He always showed up for everyone else. What he didn't realize was that not everyone was showing up for him. The message arrived on a Thursday evening. He was just finishing up paperwork in his office when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something made him swipe it open. The text was short. A single line. "You deserve to know the truth." Attached was a photo. Grainy, but unmistakable. His wife's familiar auburn hair caught in the glow of a streetlight. Her arms wrapped around a man. The kind of embrace that didn't belong to friends or casual neighbors. It belonged to someone she trusted completely. It might have taken Ethan a few seconds to register who the man was if not for the car parked in the background. A silver Dodge Charger with a dent above the left headlight. Daniel's car. The same one Ethan had helped him push out of a ditch last winter. At first, Ethan thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it was some cruel prank. But then another text followed. "Taken last night. Outside your house." His breath caught. His house. The same porch where he had strung Christmas lights with his kids. The same driveway where he and Daniel had shared beers after mowing their lawns. The betrayal wasn't abstract. It was parked right in front of his home. He sat there motionless, staring at the screen until the glow blurred into a haze. 100 emotions threatened to explode all at once. Disbelief, fury, grief. He wanted to drive home that instant, rip the keys out of Daniel's ignition, and demand an explanation from Claire. He wanted to shout, break something, cry. But he didn't. Ethan had learned long ago that the loudest man in the room rarely had the most control. In the Marines, during his short stint before injury sent him home, he was the one who stayed calm when others panicked. And in his years of business negotiations, he had discovered that silence often carried more power than words. So instead of sending a furious reply, instead of slamming doors or making calls, Ethan exhaled slowly. He typed out 3 simple words. "As you wish." It was a phrase he had used jokingly with Claire in their early years, a nod to an old movie they both loved. But now, those 3 words held a different weight. They weren't a concession. They weren't surrender. They were a quiet declaration. A signal that he would not fight on her terms, in her chaos. He would fight on his. He put his phone down on the desk, stood, and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same. Kids' bikes on lawns, porch lights glowing, the distant bark of a dog. Ordinary. Yet everything had changed. Inside his chest, the storm gathered. The man who had spent his life showing up for everyone else finally realized no one had shown up for him. And that realization hardened into something sharper than rage: purpose. Instead of barging into the house to demand answers, Ethan whispered the words again under his breath, steady and calm. "As you wish." And that was the moment his plan began. The house was dark, the clock blinking past midnight, but Ethan's mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photo burned onto the inside of his skull. Claire's arms wrapped around Daniel like a woman who had forgotten her vows, forgotten her husband, forgotten the man who had sacrificed 12 years of his life for her and their children. Most men would have stormed into the house by now. Shouted. Slammed doors. Demanded explanations. But Ethan wasn't most men. He had seen what rash decisions cost people. In the Marines, he watched a fellow recruit lose his footing in the chaos of a night drill, panicking, rushing, choosing impulse over training. It cost him his leg. Ethan learned a lesson that night. You don't fight on adrenaline. You fight on calculation. So, instead of rage, he reached for his phone. His fingers scrolled past contacts, brothers, coworkers, neighbors, before landing on one name he had kept for emergencies. Adrian Cole. Adrian wasn't family, wasn't a drinking buddy. He was Ethan's attorney. A man whose reputation in town was both revered and feared. Some people called him cold. Some called him ruthless. Ethan called him necessary. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the glowing digits of the clock. It was 12:14 in the morning. But betrayal had no business hours, and Ethan knew Adrian wouldn't care about the time. He pressed the call button. The line rang once. Twice. Then a crisp voice, calm and awake, answered. "Cole." "It's Ethan," he said quietly, almost whispering even though he was alone. The pause. Then Adrian's tone sharpened. "Tell me what happened." Ethan explained in short bursts. The photo, the car, the text. The best friend. The wife. Adrian didn't interrupt. He listened like a man who had heard it all before, like a surgeon studying an X-ray. When Ethan finished, there was only silence on the line for a beat, followed by Adrian's controlled reply. "You need to move now," the lawyer said. "Do you have access to your financial documents? Bank logins? Insurance policies? Deeds?" "Yes." "Good. Before dawn, I want you to secure everything. Screenshots, PDFs, physical copies if you can. Don't confront her. Don't warn her. Just lock it down. We'll freeze joint accounts by morning." The words landed like steady anchors. While Ethan's world had been spiraling, Adrian offered something priceless: clarity. "What about the house?" Ethan asked. "It's in both names?" "Yes. We'll put a hold on any attempts to refinance or liquidate. But I need your cooperation." "Ethan, listen carefully. Whatever fury you're holding inside, bury it for now. If you want to win, you must be colder than they are." "Can you do that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I can." "Then we have 24 hours, Adrian said. "Bring me everything by 9 a.m. If you deliver, I can have documents ready for your signature that same afternoon. Your wife and her friend won't know what hit them." Ethan spent the next 2 hours in methodical silence. He moved through his study like a soldier packing for deployment. File cabinets opened. Drawers slid shut. Bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, all scanned, copied, and loaded into a flash drive he labeled in black ink, Evidence A. On his laptop, he pulled bank logins, credit card histories, and a full export of joint transactions. What struck him most wasn't the betrayal of the photo, but the betrayal hidden in numbers. Dinner charges at restaurants he never visited. Hotel bookings Claire had never mentioned. Gas receipts across town on nights she had claimed to be home with the kids. And then came the confirmation, the GPS log. Ethan had installed a vehicle tracker years ago for insurance purposes, a precaution after Emily had borrowed the car for her learner's permit. He had nearly forgotten about it. But the app didn't lie. Claire's SUV had parked outside Daniel's apartment more than a dozen times in the last month. His hands clenched into fists, not with rage, but with something colder. Proof. Undeniable, irreversible proof. At 8:45 the next morning, Ethan walked into Adrian Cole's office with the flash drive in one pocket and a folder of hard copies in the other. The office was everything Adrian himself projected: sleek, precise, intimidating. Polished oak furniture, shelves lined with legal tomes, a faint scent of leather and ink. No family photos, no clutter, nothing warm. Just efficiency. Adrian himself sat behind the desk in a charcoal suit, tie perfectly knotted, platinum cufflinks glinting in the morning light. His hair was cropped short, his expression unreadable. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Let's begin." Ethan slid the folder across. Adrian opened it, scanning each page with the speed of a man who had trained his eyes to dissect information instantly. Hotel charges. Restaurant bills. GPS logs. He spoke like a judge reading a sentence. "And this flash drive?" "Everything digital," Ethan replied. Adrian inserted it into his computer, eyes flicking across the screen as files loaded. For the first time, a small smile touched his lips. Not warm. Predatory. "You've done well," he said. "This is more than enough to prove marital misconduct, financial misuse, and abandonment. She won't just lose credibility in divorce proceedings. She'll lose leverage." Ethan leaned forward. "What about Daniel?" Adrian looked up, eyes like ice. "He's not your legal concern. But indirectly? We'll make sure his name is tied to every receipt, every meeting, every transaction. By tonight, his career will be on fire. Do you want that?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. For the next hour, they built the first phase of what Adrian called containment. Ethan authorized the freezing of joint accounts, rerouting of paychecks into a separate account under his name only, and the immediate halt of any credit cards that Claire might have used. He also signed a temporary hold on property transfers, blocking any attempt to sell, refinance, or borrow against the family home. Adrian explained each move with surgical clarity. She can't spend what she can't access. He can't hide in the shadows if we pull him into the paperwork. Custody will hinge on stability. We're establishing that you, not her, provide it. Every signature Ethan scrawled felt like a small reclamation of control. For 12 years, he had given his trust freely. Now, he was taking it back in ink. When the final document was signed, Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan. "You understand, don't you?" the lawyer said. "By tonight, Claire will know something has changed. She will feel the ground shift beneath her feet. She will call you. She will rage, plead, accuse. And you will say nothing. Not until I tell you." Ethan nodded once. His voice was steady. "What happens next?" Adrian closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Next, we win. Within 24 hours, she'll be stripped of her leverage. The house. The accounts. The sympathy of the court. If you stay the course, Ethan, your wife will be left with nothing." As Ethan walked out of the office into the morning sun, a strange calm settled over him. He had expected to feel fury, despair, maybe even regret. Instead, he felt something else entirely: resolve. The betrayal was no longer just an open wound. It was a mission. And Ethan Hale had never failed a mission. Every betrayal has roots. No one wakes up one morning and decides to burn down the life they built. The cracks begin years earlier, almost invisible at first, like hairline fractures in glass. Ethan knew this truth in his bones, though he hadn't wanted to see it until now. He had met Claire in his early 20s. She was vibrant, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into a room and seemed to bring the light with her. At the time, Ethan was a young Marine recruit recovering from a knee injury that would soon end his military track. He was at a friend's birthday party, feeling out of place in civilian clothes, when Claire bumped into him, literally. She spilled her drink, laughed, and offered to buy him another. From that small accident bloomed a whirlwind romance. Claire studied business law, sharp-minded and confident, while Ethan rebuilt his life in logistics. Where he was steady, she was bold. Where he preferred silence, she filled it with laughter. Together, they balanced. Within a year they were married, standing in front of family and friends, promising forever. One of those friends standing proudly beside Ethan as best man was Daniel Brooks. Daniel wasn't just a friend, he was history itself, woven into Ethan's life. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, played Little League together, sat in the same classrooms, and even shared the same punishment the day they skipped school to fish at the old quarry. When Ethan enlisted, Daniel didn't. He stayed behind, building a career in real estate. But the bond never weakened. Daniel was there when Ethan returned from training, when he bought his first car, when he proposed to Claire. In those early years, the three of them were inseparable. Weekend barbecues, double dates, late-night card games around Ethan's kitchen table. If you asked Ethan then, he would have said he was the luckiest man alive. A loving wife, a loyal best friend, a family growing strong. But luck has a way of hiding danger until it's too late. Looking back, the contrast became clearer. Ethan poured himself into his work, driven by the desire to provide stability for Claire and their children. He took on overtime, late-night calls, and weekend shifts. Every extra dollar went toward the mortgage, the kids' schooling, or saving for family vacations. He told himself sacrifice now meant comfort later. And during those long hours when Ethan wasn't there, Claire and Daniel were. At first, it made sense. Daniel lived nearby, always willing to lend a hand. If Ethan was out on a delivery run, Daniel would stop by to fix a leaky faucet or help Claire carry groceries. When Emily was little, Daniel attended her birthday parties, standing right beside Ethan to help light the candles. But slowly, lines blurred. The signs were subtle, easy to dismiss at the time. A late-night study session, Claire claimed she needed with a colleague, though Ethan later noticed Daniel's car parked not far from the library. Inside jokes that Ethan wasn't part of, the kind that made them laugh at dinner while he sat in silence, trying to catch up. Claire's sudden coldness some evenings, short answers, distracted eyes, followed by unusual warmth the next day as though to compensate. Ethan remembered one night in particular. He had returned home earlier than expected from a late shift. Claire was in the kitchen, phone in hand, smiling at something she quickly swiped away when he walked in. He asked what was so funny. She shrugged, saying it was just a meme Daniel had sent her. He brushed it off then. After all, Daniel had been sending him memes for years too. What harm was there in laughter? But looking back, that moment haunted him. Because laughter shared in secrecy is rarely innocent. The seeds of suspicion grew, but Ethan buried them. He convinced himself he was imagining things. After all, Claire had been by his side for 12 years. Daniel had been by his side for nearly 30. If you can't trust your wife and your best friend, who can you trust? So he silenced the questions, chalked up her distance to stress, his own exhaustion, the busyness of life. He thought he was choosing peace. In reality, he was choosing blindness. And blindness is exactly what betrayal needs to thrive. Now, sitting in Adrian's office with a folder of evidence that proved everything, Ethan couldn't help but trace back the timeline. How long had it been going on? Months? Years? The GPS logs said weeks, but the intimacy in that photo suggested something deeper. Had they laughed about him when he wasn't there? Whispered inside jokes while he worked late shifts? Did Claire ever look at Daniel the way she had once looked at him, back in their 20s, when they thought the world was theirs to conquer? The questions tore at him, but Ethan forced them into the same locked drawer where he stored his rage. Questions wouldn't win this battle. Evidence would. Precision would. Still, one memory refused to stay buried. 3 months earlier, Daniel had asked Ethan for help co-signing a loan for a new investment property. Ethan declined, politely, but firmly. "I can't tie up family funds right now," he had said. Daniel brushed it off, joking about Ethan being too cautious. But afterward, Ethan noticed a shift. Daniel became cooler toward him, less open, almost guarded. At the same time, Claire had grown more irritable, quicker to point out Ethan's absences. Had that been the moment they crossed the line? When money closed one door, did betrayal open another? By now, Ethan understood one thing. Betrayal is never random. It's calculated, planned, fed slowly over time until it replaces loyalty with selfishness. Claire and Daniel hadn't stumbled into this. They had chosen it, moment by moment, secret by secret, until they had rewritten the meaning of love and friendship. But if they thought Ethan would crumble quietly, they had miscalculated. Because Ethan was no longer blind. He saw them now for what they truly were, Not a wife and a friend, but co-conspirators. And conspiracies, he knew, could be dismantled. He stared out the office window at the city skyline, jaw tight, as Adrian stacked the files neatly into a case. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself a thin smile. Not of joy, but of clarity. Tomorrow would bring more evidence, more leverage, more moves that would leave Claire and Daniel scrambling. They thought they were clever. They thought they were safe. But nothing compared to what he was about to uncover tomorrow. Ethan knew the evidence he had gathered was powerful, but he also knew Claire and Daniel would deny everything when cornered. That was their nature: deny, twist, minimize. He needed more than receipts and GPS logs. He needed something undeniable. Something that would break through their lies and leave no room for escape. That was when Adrian leaned back in his chair and said, "I'll put you in touch with someone. Discreet. Reliable. He's not cheap, but if you want the kind of proof that ends arguments before they begin, he's your man." The man's name was Marcus Steele, a private investigator whose reputation lived in whispered tones across the city. Former police detective, discharged after exposing corruption in his own department. Some called him reckless. Others called him relentless. Ethan only cared about one thing: results. They met in a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where truckers sipped coffee at 2 a.m. and nobody looked twice at a stranger with a notepad. Marcus was already there when Ethan arrived, a steaming mug in front of him, eyes sharp and restless like a hawk scanning a field for prey. "You're Hale," Marcus said without introduction. His voice carried gravel, the kind that came from too many cigarettes and too many secrets. "I am." Ethan slid into the booth. "And you're the man Adrian recommended." Marcus gave a dry smile. "If Cole sent you, you must be serious. He doesn't waste my time with amateurs. Tell me what you need." Ethan laid out the story in precise, clipped sentences. The photo, the texts, the logs. Marcus listened, never interrupting, just jotting notes in a shorthand only he understood. When Ethan finished, Marcus closed the notebook. "Cheating's easy to prove. It's the why and the what next that matter. You want me to catch them in the act? I want the truth, wherever it leads." Marcus nodded once. "Give me a week." "You have 48 hours, Ethan countered. For the first time, Marcus looked surprised. But then he smiled again, sharper this time. "I like a man who knows what he wants." The next 2 days were the longest of Ethan's life. He went through the motions at work, his face a mask of composure, but every buzz of his phone sent his stomach into knots. At home, Claire carried on as if nothing had changed, making dinner, chatting about the children's schoolwork, kissing him goodnight. If she suspected anything, she hid it well. But Ethan noticed details now that he had once ignored. The way she angled her phone away when texting. The late-night showers after errands. The distracted smile when Daniel's name appeared in a story she told. He said nothing. He only watched. And then, on the second night, Marcus delivered. The photos came first, sent in a single encrypted file. Ethan opened them alone in his study, the glow of the laptop casting shadows on the walls. Each image cut deeper than the last. Claire and Daniel at a restaurant downtown, leaning close across the table, hands brushing. Claire's laughter frozen mid-frame, a smile Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in years. Another photo outside a hotel. Claire stepping out of Daniel's car, hair falling loose around her shoulders, his hand at the small of her back like a man who believed she belonged to him. And then the final photo, Claire and Daniel in the hotel lobby, her head resting briefly on his shoulder, his lips brushing the top of her hair. Intimate. Familiar. Comfortable. Ethan's throat tightened. The evidence had told him. But seeing it captured in the undeniable objectivity of a lens, was something else entirely. Proof didn't just confirm suspicion. Proof carved away denial. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting to the framed photo on the bookshelf. His wedding day. Claire in white, smiling at him like he was the only man in the world. Ethan in uniform, straight-backed and proud, holding her hand like it was a promise he would never break. For a long time, he stared at that picture, the tears threatening but never falling. His chest ached, his jaw clenched. He had faced fear before, combat drills, close calls, nights when sleep wouldn't come. But nothing compared to this quiet, suffocating grief. He reached out, brushed his fingers across the glass of the frame, then set it face down on the shelf. That man, that promise, they had been buried long ago, and Claire herself had been the one to lower them into the ground. Later that night, Marcus called. "I thought you should hear this," the PI said. "It's not just dinner and hotels. I bugged the car. Picked up enough conversation to know your friend Daniel's been using your secrets against you." Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. "Explain." "He told her things you once confided in him. Your doubts. Your fears. Times you worried you weren't around enough. He spins them, makes you look selfish, inattentive. He paints himself as the one who understands her. Classic manipulation. He's not just your rival. He's rewriting your story to her." Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered the night he told Daniel about missing Emily's recital, how guilty he felt. He remembered admitting to his friend that sometimes he feared Claire deserved better than a husband always buried in work. Words he spoke in trust, in brotherhood. And now, those words had been twisted into weapons. "That's not all," Marcus continued. "Your wife mentioned plans. Big ones. Not just secret meetings. They're talking about property, about money, and about your kids." The words landed like a hammer. "My kids?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yeah," Marcus said grimly. She told him, "Once the house is settled, once custody is in place, everything will fall neatly into our hands." And Daniel agreed. "Whatever this is, it's not just about an affair. They're building a life together. One that erases you completely." Ethan stood frozen in the middle of his study, the darkness pressing in around him. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. They weren't content to steal moments in hotel lobbies. They wanted to take everything. His home, his money, his family. And suddenly, the grief hardened again into something sharper. They thought he would fold. They thought silence meant weakness. But Ethan Hale had faced worse enemies than this. He had stared down men with rifles, outlasted storms on deployment, carried brothers out of fire. He would carry this too, not with rage, but with precision. He lifted the phone back to his ear. "Keep digging," he told Marcus. Marcus's voice was steady. "Already on it. But Ethan, brace yourself. Because what I'm hearing suggests it goes deeper than you realize." That night, Ethan sat alone in the living room, the wedding photo still face down on the shelf, the house unnervingly quiet. The children were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware. Claire was out again, claiming a late meeting. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He stared at the dark window, his own reflection staring back at him. A man reshaped by betrayal, forged into something harder. He whispered the same 3 words he had spoken the night before, "As you wish." Because if Claire and Daniel wanted war, he was ready. But this would not be their war. It would be his. And worse, far worse, they weren't just sneaking around. They weren't just betraying his trust. They had plans that involved his own house and his children. Every betrayal has a breaking point, the moment when private sins evolve into public consequences. For Ethan, that moment came the next morning when Marcus slid a new file across the diner booth. "Thought you'd want to see this," the PI said. Ethan opened the folder, expecting more grainy photos or receipts. Instead, he found a signed agreement from a realtor's office. His wife's name. Daniel's name. The paperwork wasn't about a secret rendezvous. It was about real estate. They weren't just sneaking around. They were preparing to sell the Hale family home. Marcus tapped the page with one blunt finger. "They met with a realtor yesterday afternoon. The listing package is ready. If they follow through, your house could hit the market within days." Ethan's breath tightened. That house wasn't just wood and brick, it was 12 years of memories. Emily's first steps across the kitchen floor. Tyler's fingerpaint masterpieces still faintly staining the hallway wall. Every nail, every corner, every echo of laughter embedded into it. "Not possible," Ethan muttered. "I would have had to sign off." "Normally, yes," Marcus said. "But Daniel's already moved money around. He's fronted Claire enough cash to make it look like she's sole decision-maker. They'll try to pressure you into quick consent, or they'll find a loophole. It didn't stop there. The second document showed bank activity. Claire had liquidated part of their joint savings, transferring it into an account Ethan didn't recognize. On the memo line, down payment. And worse, tucked behind the papers was a series of emails Marcus had intercepted. Correspondence between Claire, Daniel, and a banker downtown. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They were securing a new mortgage, together. A future that erased Ethan entirely. Marcus's eyes hardened. This isn't just infidelity anymore. It's annexation. They're trying to take your property, your money, and your standing as a father. If they sell that house, they'll control the narrative. You'll be the man who walked away. And the courts will see it that way too. For the first time, Ethan felt the pull of something primal. He imagined storming into his own home that very night, grabbing Daniel by the collar, putting his fist through the smug grin he'd seen in those photographs. He pictured Claire watching as her lover collapsed, finally understanding the cost of betrayal. His hands shook as the fantasy bloomed. But then he exhaled, steadying himself, pushing the thought away. No, he whispered. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I won't give them chaos, Ethan said, his voice sharpening with resolve. I'll give them consequences. By noon, Ethan was back in Adrian Cole's office. The lawyer read through the folder Marcus provided, expressionless except for the faintest flicker of satisfaction. They're moving fast, Adrian said. That tells me they're desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. He leaned forward. We'll file an emergency injunction to halt any sale of the home. That buys us 72 hours. But if you want to crush this, we need more than delay. We need a counterstrike. How long? Ethan asked. Adrian checked his watch. If you get me everything Marcus has uncovered, I can move within 24 hours. Bank freezes. Custody filings. Leverage so sharp she won't see it coming. Ethan nodded. Then you'll have it. That night, Ethan sat alone in his car outside the darkened house. He hadn't gone inside since receiving that first text. Through the window, he saw the faint glow of the living room lamp. He could almost imagine Claire inside, perhaps curled on the sofa with Daniel, maybe laughing at some private joke. His chest ached, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Instead, he pulled an old photograph from his wallet. His wedding day again, this time a smaller print, worn from years of being carried. He stared at it until his eyes blurred, until the laughter and promises of that day became ghosts pressing against the present. Tears welled, hot and unwanted. He swiped them away with the back of his hand. The Ethan Hale of 12 years ago had trusted blindly. The Ethan Hale of today knew better. The next morning, Adrian called. We're ready, the lawyer said briskly. Bring Marcus's recordings, the realtor documents, and the bank transfers. Once you sign the filings, they'll be locked out of every move they're trying to make. Then let's do it, Ethan replied. By noon, he was in Adrian's office again. Papers stacked high, signatures flowing like a battle plan. Each stroke of ink felt less like bureaucracy and more like ammunition loaded into a rifle. When it was done, Adrian looked at him squarely. You've just shifted the battlefield. They think they're about to win. In 24 hours, they'll realize the ground has collapsed beneath their feet. Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile. Not of joy, of clarity. Good. That evening, as if on cue, Claire texted him. A single message. Final. Don't come back. Ethan stared at the screen, the words burning into him. Once, they might have broken him. But now, they only hardened his resolve. Because Claire thought the game was over. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that her countdown had already begun. Every betrayal has a breaking point, the moment when private sins evolve into public consequences. For Ethan, that moment came the next morning when Marcus slid a new file across the diner booth. Thought you'd want to see this, the PI said. Ethan opened the folder, expecting more grainy photos or receipts. Instead, he found a signed agreement from a realtor's office. His wife's name. Daniel's name. The paperwork wasn't about a secret rendezvous. It was about real estate. They weren't just sneaking around. They were preparing to sell the Hale family home. Marcus tapped the page with one blunt finger. They met with a realtor yesterday afternoon. The listing package is ready. If they follow through, your house could hit the market within days. Ethan's breath tightened. That house wasn't just wood and brick, it was 12 years of memories. Emily's first steps across the kitchen floor. Tyler's finger paint masterpieces still faintly staining the hallway wall. Every nail, every corner, every echo of laughter embedded into it. Not possible, Ethan muttered. I would have had to sign off. Normally, yes, Marcus said. But Daniel's already moved money around. He's fronted Claire enough cash to make it look like she's sole decision-maker. They'll try to pressure you into quick consent, or they'll find a loophole. It didn't stop there. The second document showed bank activity. Claire had liquidated part of their joint savings, transferring it into an account Ethan didn't recognize. On the memo line, down payment. And worse, tucked behind the papers was a series of emails Marcus had intercepted. Correspondence between Claire, Daniel, and a banker downtown. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They were securing a new mortgage, together. A future that erased Ethan entirely. Marcus's eyes hardened. This isn't just infidelity anymore. It's annexation. They're trying to take your property, your money, and your standing as a father. If they sell that house, they'll control the narrative. You'll be the man who walked away. And the courts will see it that way too. For the first time, Ethan felt the pull of something primal. He imagined storming into his own home that very night, grabbing Daniel by the collar, putting his fist through the smug grin he'd seen in those photographs. He pictured Claire watching as her lover collapsed, finally understanding the cost of betrayal. His hands shook as the fantasy bloomed. But then he exhaled, steadying himself, pushing the thought away. No, he whispered. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I won't give them chaos, Ethan said, his voice sharpening with resolve. I'll give them consequences. By noon, Ethan was back in Adrian Cole's office. The lawyer read through the folder Marcus provided, expressionless except for the faintest flicker of satisfaction. They're moving fast, Adrian said. That tells me they're desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. He leaned forward. We'll file an emergency injunction to halt any sale of the home. That buys us 72 hours. But if you want to crush this, we need more than delay. We need a counterstrike. How long? Ethan asked. Adrian checked his watch. If you get me everything Marcus has uncovered, I can move within 24 hours. Bank freezes. Custody filings. Leverage so sharp she won't see it coming. Ethan nodded. Then you'll have it. That night, Ethan sat alone in his car outside the darkened house. He hadn't gone inside since receiving that first text. Through the window, he saw the faint glow of the living room lamp. He could almost imagine Claire inside, perhaps curled on the sofa with Daniel, maybe laughing at some private joke. His chest ached, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Instead, he pulled an old photograph from his wallet. His wedding day again, this time a smaller print, worn from years of being carried. He stared at it until his eyes blurred, until the laughter and promises of that day became ghosts pressing against the present. Tears welled, hot and unwanted. He swiped them away with the back of his hand. The Ethan Hale of 12 years ago had trusted blindly. The Ethan Hale of today knew better. The next morning, Adrian called. We're ready, the lawyer said briskly. Bring Marcus's recordings, the realtor documents, and the bank transfers. Once you sign the filings, they'll be locked out of every move they're trying to make. Then let's do it, Ethan replied. By noon, he was in Adrian's office again. Papers stacked high, signatures flowing like a battle plan. Each stroke of ink felt less like bureaucracy and more like ammunition loaded into a rifle. When it was done, Adrian looked at him squarely. You've just shifted the battlefield. They think they're about to win. In 24 hours, they'll realize the ground has collapsed beneath their feet. Ethan allowed himself the smallest smile. Not of joy, of clarity. Good. That evening, as if on cue, Claire texted him. A single message. Final. Don't come back. Ethan stared at the screen, the words burning into him. Once, they might have broken him. But now, they only hardened his resolve. Because Claire thought the game was over. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that her countdown had already begun. Betrayal alone could wound a man. But betrayal backed by deception, financial theft, and manipulation? That required more than pain. It required strategy. By now Ethan had learned that Claire and Daniel weren't simply indulging in an affair. They were constructing an escape plan, one that hinged on his silence. They thought he would be too blindsided, too broken, too passive to respond. But Ethan Hale had stopped being passive the moment he whispered, "As you wish." Now it was time to set the trap. Marcus, the private investigator, delivered the first brick of leverage on a rainy Wednesday morning. They met again at the diner, rain drumming against the wide front windows, streaking the neon lights into jagged blurs. "You were right," Marcus said, sliding over a flash drive. "The bank transfers are real. Claire moved nearly $35,000 from your joint account into Daniel's name. But here's the kicker, she disguised them as household expenses." Ethan opened the laptop Marcus brought, scrolling through the transactions. Line after line of withdrawals, always neat, always disguised with vague labels. Groceries. But the amounts told another story, thousands siphoned at a time, perfectly timed with Daniel's property ventures. "Every dollar," Marcus added, "leaves a trail." And she left plenty. The second brick came from Adrian, the lawyer. He'd uncovered a pair of credit cards Ethan had never seen before, secret accounts opened under Claire's name, but the billing address tied to Daniel's apartment. "She's funding their lifestyle on paper that links back to him," Adrian explained, tapping the folder. "Hotel rooms, dinners, weekend trips. This isn't just adultery, it's financial fraud. And once fraud touches marital property, the courts don't take it lightly." Ethan sat quietly, absorbing the weight of each revelation. With every new piece of evidence, the betrayal cut deeper. But it also sharpened his resolve. The final brick came that evening. Marcus called with a clipped tone Ethan recognized from soldiers giving battlefield updates. "Got a recording," the PI said. "Picked up from the bug in Daniel's car. You need to hear this yourself." Ethan met him in the dim glow of a parking lot, Marcus holding out a small recorder. He pressed play. Claire's voice came through, muffled but clear enough. "Once the accounts are drained, he won't have the strength to fight. Ethan's too careful, he'll never go public, not with the kids involved." Daniel's laugh followed. "Good. Because by the time he even thinks about it, we'll have the house sold and custody angled in our favor. Courts love stability, and you know what's more stable than a father always working late? A new house, 2 parents present every night. He'll be history." The recording clicked off. Ethan stood frozen, fists clenched, heart pounding. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was annihilation. They were plotting to erase him from his children's lives, to turn him into nothing more than a footnote. But they had underestimated one thing: Ethan wasn't broken. He was watching. He was waiting. And he was setting the stage for consequences. The next morning, Ethan returned to Adrian's office. Together, they mapped out the strike. Step 1. Freeze Claire's access to marital funds. With Marcus's proof of fraudulent transfers, Adrian filed immediate motions to cut off joint accounts. Step 2. Trigger the prenup clauses. Years earlier, Ethan had reluctantly signed an agreement drafted by Claire's father, a shrewd businessman who never fully trusted his daughter's marriage. What Claire didn't know was that buried in the fine print was a clause protecting Ethan's separate earnings if material evidence of misconduct ever surfaced. Adrian had all the evidence he needed. Step 3. Repossess household assets. Cars, electronics, furniture, all bought under Ethan's income. By noon, Adrian had filed paperwork ensuring that any attempt to liquidate would require Ethan's explicit signature. "Every move they try to make," Adrian said, sliding a fresh set of documents across the desk, "will now run into a wall. And when walls rise fast, people panic." Ethan signed. Each stroke of the pen was less an act of paperwork and more an act of war. That afternoon, the trap nearly sprung too soon. Ethan stopped by the house, under Adrian's advice, to quietly retrieve a box of old military documents that might strengthen his custody argument. He slipped in with the spare key, moving silently down the hall toward his office. But then he heard it, laughter. Claire's, bright and familiar, followed by Daniel's deeper chuckle. They were in the living room, voices low, words indistinct. Ethan froze. For a moment, he imagined stepping into the doorway, throwing the evidence on the table, confronting them both in front of his children who sat just upstairs doing homework. He pictured Daniel's smug grin shattering, Claire's excuses unraveling, the satisfaction of truth hitting them like a hammer. His hand clenched on the doorknob. But then he heard a sound upstairs, a child's chair scraping back, footsteps moving toward the stairs. Emily, curious about the noise. In that instant, Ethan released the knob and stepped back into the shadows. His pulse hammered, but his resolve held. He wouldn't let his children be collateral damage in this war. They deserved stability, not chaos. As Emily's voice floated down, "Mom? Who's here?" Ethan slipped silently out the back door, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. Patience, he told himself. No chaos. Only consequences. That night, Ethan met Adrian once more. The lawyer's office lights burned well past closing time, illuminating the documents stacked like weapons on the desk. "Everything's ready," Adrian said. "We file first thing in the morning. Then at 2 o'clock, we sit across the table from her and her attorney. By the time she realizes what's happening, her foundation will already be gone." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of 12 years of marriage pressing against the reality of tomorrow. For a moment, grief flickered again. What had once been love, what could never be again. But grief gave way to something stronger, clarity. Tomorrow, Claire would learn the cost of betrayal. The clock was set. The papers were filed. The trap was ready. And at exactly 2 p.m. the next day, Ethan Hale would confront the woman who had been his wife, and the man who had called himself his best friend. Within 24 hours of the conference room reckoning, the world Claire and Daniel had built on lies collapsed. The first blow landed early the next morning. Claire arrived at the house with a set of keys that no longer worked. The locks had been changed by court order, the sheriff's deputy waiting in his cruiser out front to enforce the notice. She rattled the knob, disbelief flashing across her face when the door refused to yield. From inside, Ethan stood silently, watching through the narrow edge of the curtain. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He simply let the paperwork, the signatures, and the law itself do what his anger never could. Claire wasn't just locked out of the home, she was locked out of the life she had tried to steal. The second blow came that afternoon. Joint accounts frozen, credit cards canceled, savings shielded by injunctions. Ethan didn't need to hear the details. He could picture them clearly. Claire standing in line at her bank, swiping her card, only to be told her funds were temporarily unavailable. The silence on the other end of her frantic phone call to Daniel when she realized the safety net was gone. Money had always been her weapon, her security blanket. Now it was gone, sealed tight by the very clauses she had ignored in her arrogance. The third blow landed on Daniel himself. By evening, word spread through the city. Brooks Development had severed ties with its own partner. Daniel's name was scrubbed from the website, his phone calls unanswered by investors. Marcus had pulled strings, delivering Adrian's files directly to the board of directors. Fraud, hidden accounts, whispers of misconduct. It didn't matter if all of it would take months to litigate. Reputation lived and died in seconds. And Daniel's reputation died before sunset. The man who once strutted through business luncheons and whispered promises of power was now radioactive, avoided by colleagues who feared being caught in his collapse. Ethan felt no triumph, only finality. That evening, he sat his children down in the living room. Emily and Tyler perched anxiously on the couch, their eyes searching his face for answers they weren't sure they wanted. "Dad," Emily whispered, "is it true? Are you and Mom done?" Ethan inhaled slowly, the weight of fatherhood pressing on his shoulders. "Your mom and I are divorcing," he said gently. "But that doesn't change one thing. I am still your father. I always will be." Tyler frowned, voice small. "She said you left us. That you didn't want to come back." The words pierced like a blade, but Ethan kept his voice calm. "That wasn't true. I never left you. I never stopped wanting you. What happened between me and your mom is not your fault. Do you understand? Emily's eyes welled, but she nodded. Tyler's jaw tightened, like a boy trying to carry more weight than his years should allow. Ethan pulled them both close, holding them until their shoulders eased. Whatever happens next, he whispered, we're still a family. A different shape, maybe. But still a family. For the first time in weeks, the children allowed themselves to believe it. Across town, Claire stood in the doorway of a small apartment with peeling paint and carpet worn thin by decades of tenants. The realtor handed her the keys with polite detachment. No polished marble countertops, no sprawling backyard, no leather sofa comfort. Just 2 small bedrooms and the hollow echo of choices made. She set her suitcase down, staring at the walls as if waiting for them to transform. But walls don't lie. They simply reflect. And what stared back at her was the truth. She had traded a home for an empty promise. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. When she finally swiped it open, his voice was sharp, frantic. They fired me, Claire. Do you understand? I'm finished. Everyone's turning on me. This is your fault. She hung up without another word, tossing the phone onto the mattress. Silence filled the apartment, heavier than any argument. Meanwhile, Ethan moved through the house with quiet resolve. He collected old photos, boxed up children's toys, secured documents in the safe. Every action was deliberate, not out of anger but out of ownership. He was reclaiming what had always been his. Late that night, he poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, staring at the home he had fought for. The same house Claire had tried to sell out from under him. His reflection in the darkened window looked older than it had weeks ago. Tired eyes, lines carved by sleepless nights. But beneath the weariness was something new, clarity. She betrayed me in silence, he murmured, the words barely above a whisper. And I took everything back in silence. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. But it was justice. And justice, he knew, was enough. Several weeks passed. Enough time for the dust to settle, enough time for the shock to fade into routine. Ethan's home no longer felt like a battlefield. The locks were changed, the shadows lifted, the silence filled again with the sound of children's laughter and ordinary life. Emily had started piano lessons again, her music drifting through the halls like a promise of healing. Tyler joined a soccer team, running hard across the field every weekend, shouting his father's name from the sidelines when he scored. They were thriving. Slowly but unmistakably. Claire, meanwhile, moved through the weeks like a ghost. The small apartment she had rented became her cage. Neighbors gossiped, friends withdrew, and the woman who once carried herself with untouchable pride now found herself in long grocery lines with no one smiling back. She still tried to sting Ethan through texts, sharp little messages filled with bitterness. But bitterness without leverage was powerless. She had lost the house. Lost access to the accounts. Lost the trust of her children, who no longer clung to her stories about their father's supposed abandonment. And every time she tried to claw back some semblance of control, she was met with Adrian's legal precision and Ethan's unshakable silence. Daniel Brooks fared even worse. Within 2 weeks of the conference room confrontation, his name was poison in business circles. Investors cut ties. Clients walked away. He was removed from his own company in disgrace, his shares dissolved in a boardroom coup. Rumors swirled of debt collectors circling, of bridges burned beyond repair. And then, just like that, he was gone. Vanished from the city. No forwarding address, no explanation. A man who once boasted about power now reduced to whispers of failure. Ethan didn't care where he went. As far as he was concerned, Daniel Brooks had ceased to exist. For Ethan, life settled into something quieter, something sturdier. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, sunlight catching on the dew-soaked grass. Evenings ended with Emily and Tyler sharing stories from their day, sometimes bickering, sometimes laughing, but always secure. He no longer stared at the wedding photo. He had tucked it away in a box, not out of bitterness, but because the past no longer held him hostage. At school events, he stood tall among other parents, no longer weighed down by suspicion. Teachers noticed the change in Emily and Tyler, their confidence, their steadier smiles. the Hale family had weathered the storm. One Saturday afternoon, during Tyler's soccer game, a woman from the sidelines struck up a conversation with Ethan. Her name was Julia, a single parent, quick-witted, kind-eyed, cheering loudly for her own child. Their words flowed easily, laughter slipping into the pauses between goals. There was no promise in that moment, no instant romance. Just a flicker of possibility, a reminder that life still held doors that could open. And for Ethan, that was enough. As the weeks folded into a new rhythm, he found himself reflecting on the journey. How betrayal had nearly broken him, how silence had been his greatest weapon. Claire had thought she could erase him quietly, but he had taken everything back the same way, without shouting, without chaos, without violence. He thought of the night he first read her message, "Don't come back." And now, standing in the living room with his children safe, his home secure, his future steady, he allowed himself the final word. Sometimes betrayal doesn't deserve rage, he murmured to himself. It deserves precision. And in the end, she was left with nothing, exactly what she gave me. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and justice, subscribe for more.